They don't like the prospects of that, so they want to kill my name. And they just call me. Bill O'Reilly goes, there's a lot of sexual predators using Facebook to stalk women. How do we stop this hate? And they cut to an image of me yelling. Nothing to do with women. So, Alex makes you lose a Super Bowl. Alex wants to rape the women. Alex is behind the Boston bombing, MSNBC. They're out to get us, folks, because we're over the target. Now, I don't want to talk about myself all day, but I wanted to get Greg Palast, media analyst, London Guardian, BBC, the whole nine yards, true investigative journalist in the Mickey Spillane vein. I've thrown a lot out there. I want to get into robber barons. I want to get into his new book. I want to get into destabilization programs, Ukraine, the Middle East. But Greg, I mean, ISIS, I know we've argued about pure inside job versus, let it happen or whatever. So you're kind of on the other side of this. But should I be demonized for pointing out our government created al-Qaeda, helped fund ISIS? I mean, that's mainstream news, Greg. What is your view on the evidence coming out of the 28 pages that there was a stand down, that the Saudi Arabians were quarterbacking the operation?
Well, two things. I admit I haven't seen the 28 pages. Why don't you send it to me, Alex, and I'll take a look. Obviously, we have different views on 9/11. But, I already got in super hot water when I put at the top of the BBC nightly news worldwide that, the Bush family was connected to the bin Ladens, and the FBI was told to stand down on investigations.
You broke that.
Family. Yeah. And Michael Moore kind of repeated but got it a bit wrong. But the important thing was what we put on BBC was that U.S. agents, several U.S. agents, told us point blank, you don't touch the bin Laden family. It's a career killer. We had a document that says that was slipped to us by FBI agents that said, eyes only. So, it was just like a bad Mickey Spillane scene, eyes only, top secret.
Yeah, what was the name of that document, Bush's and bin Laden's? Because that's in your book. It made international news.
Yeah, and the thing was that they said, but of course, a lot of it is just, I don't know what they knew, but they were, it was going to be an embarrassment to our government. And, once again, I see our flags in America at half-mast for King Abdullah, who is, of Saudi Arabia. Let's remember, while we're talking about bringing democracy in the world, that King Abdullah is nothing but a dictator in a bathrobe. They call him a king, but that's
well, I mean, it's well known that Saudi Arabia has been behind the takeover in Syria and behind al-Qaeda in Syria. And ISIS, they're arming them while claiming they're fighting them. But, I mean, clearly Saudi Arabia is exporting terrorism around the world.
Yeah, I mean, one of the plans of Saudi Arabia was to somewhat, because remember that some of the fundamentalists grabbed the Kaaba, which is the central point in Mecca. And that could have led to the overthrow of the current House of Saud. So they kind of cut a deal with these guys. You leave us in charge of Saudi Arabia and the oil kingdom, and you go out and do whatever you want. And here's a few $1,000,000 to go, play with explosives in the rest of the world.
That's right. So they exported their revolution.
Right. They exported the fundamentalist freaks. I mean, not that you have to understand Wahhabism is, is severe. It's a kind of fascistic version of Islam. It's,
it's mind controlled.
Yeah. And it's, it's also controlled by whip, controlled by sword, controlled by beatings, controlled by prisons. It's not just the mind that's being seized there.
Now, why don't we see more of these big feminist groups criticizing Wahhabism and the sheiks that Obama's bowing to? Instead, they're saying, oh, sorry you had a boy in the Super Bowl, and, guys being good at sports makes girls feel bad. I mean, they just want to whip American men into subservience. I see them as their own modern form of fascism. I wish the feminists would go after the Saudis.
Well, I think that's important. I don't, you and I may have some disagreements, but I'll tell you this: the Saudis, we keep being told that they're our friends. Well, your friends don't send money to people who are trying to kill you. Okay, that's not what I call a friend. I mean, that's a different idea than my idea of friendship. Yes, what the elite means by friendship is that James Baker and his law firm are counsel to the House of Saud. It means that people like Vernon Jordan are on the Saudi payroll. So it's Democrats, Republicans, all one little happy club being greased by the Saudis. And by the way, Governor Chris Christie spent 3 days being feted by the House of Saud, where they brought in Bono to greet Governor Christie, all at the king's behest. And by the way, that was only possible because Chris Christie waived the ethics rules for the state of New Jersey officials, exempting himself from the ethics rules, which would bar him from taking these gimmies from the king of Saudi Arabia. His entire family, in-laws, everyone, the whole retinue was flown over to Saudi Arabia to go to 3 parties with the king, and they had a special deal in the desert. But I'm not picking on Christie for alone. This is how the entire elite is operating. It's very, very dangerous. And it's giving these guys a pass. I saw that with the FBI documents. The Sauds are supposed to be our buddies, so don't look at anything that might suggest trouble. It was a stand down on the investigation.
That's right. I forget the name of that stand down order. I can see it in my mind right now. It's a photocopy of the actual document.
Yeah, it's the I-99 document. It says, like I said, it says, you can see it in my book, The Best Democracy Money Can
Buy. That's right, guys. Google I-99 FBI document, Greg Palast, and we can put it on screen for TV viewers. Radio listeners can search that out for themselves. Now, I want to shift gears into why you originally came on, coming up here in a few minutes. But what is your view, speaking of the Saudis, on what's behind the plummeting oil prices? I mean, I know you've got all the big contacts. You heard me basically say it's a way to shut down the smaller oil producers here, and at the same time shut down and bankrupt the Russians? Or do you have another angle on what's really going on?
You got it in one, Alex. Well, here's the funny thing, or the sad thing, the sick thing, is in my book, Armed Madhouse, and where you have George Bush and what was then Prince Abdullah scooting around the Bush ranch in a golf cart, some cowboy, right? So the pretend cowboys are out there in their golf cart on the ranch. And just before the 2004 election, the price of oil went from $110 a barrel to $20 a barrel in a couple of weeks, just before the election, helping Bush. Who knows what was said in the golf cart? Now, I said every 10 years, the Saudis deliberately drop the price of oil to wipe out all competition, whether it's solar, whether it's tar sands, whether it's small-time frackers, and 20 years ago was to knock out the Russians, of course, for fighting fanatic Islam. And so now they're doing it again. I said that they do it every 10 years, and I was wrong, Alex. I was off by 1 month. Instead of October 2014, which I predicted 8 years ago, it was November 2000.
You did. I read that in your book, and you said that on air.
Right there. It's right there and printed in the book, which was published in 2006. I said 2014, October, you're going to see it again. I was wrong by 1 month. So you're right. They're doing it. They want to wipe out right now. They want to punish the Russians, who are, for whatever else you might think of the Russians, they're pretty darn steadfast against the rise of fanatic forms of Islam. They clearly are very unhappy with fracking in America, and they want to knock it out. We're not talking about the stuff that environmentalists care about, the gas fracking. They're talking about South Dakota, where the fracking is flooding the market. They want to wipe out the tar sands, guys. And even more, there's always been tension with Venezuela. And if the price of oil stayed above $110 a barrel, you were going to see Venezuela open up those heavy oil fields that it has. But no one's going to touch those heavy oil fields when the price of oil is below $50 a barrel. It costs about $60.
For folks who don't know, they've got oil that has to be processed a lot, and the Saudis have that sweet crude that gets turned into gasoline really, really quick. That's why that Saudi oil's king.
Saudi oil is king because it's $4 a barrel to pull up versus $40 a barrel for tar sands, or $50 a barrel for tar sands, and $40 a barrel for heavy oil out of Venezuela. And so they're going to keep the Venezuelans off the market. If you look at, by the way, go to OPEC's website. Saudi Arabia is not listed as the world's largest oil reserve. Venezuela is, and it's listed as having 3 times the reserves of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia says, you may have the reserves, but you ain't taking it out of the ground, sucker. Not at this price. So it was Sheikh Yamani himself. Sheikh Yamani is the ambassador to OPEC, the oil cartel, for Saudi Arabia. And as he says, the Stone Age didn't end when people ran out of stones. He says the oil age won't end when people run out of oil. It's when they have another source other than our stuff. So he says that's how he explained the last time he dumped the price of oil, and 20 years ago went down to $10 a barrel.
Well, here's the big question. Will they be successful?
Yeah. Will the Saudis be successful? Because remember, and also when we say the Saudis, we mean their whole crew. We mean their whole crew of James Baker, who also represents ExxonMobil Corporation, and the rest. The oil majors are not unhappy with this. Yeah, they'll take a hit for a year or two. What do they care? It knocks out all their competitors.
Sure, they're all involved in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, they benefit from OPEC. Remember, OPEC is by any measure an absolute illegal cartel. It's a violation of U.S. criminal law to have a combination to raise or control the quantity or price of any commodity. It is a go-to-jail crime. And yet we have our president kissing Abdullah's camel on the cheek. Our flags are at half-mast. What's that all about? I saw that in London, too.
Oh, my gosh, I noticed that here and didn't even do a story. I was at a courthouse doing a piece for a movie, and I noticed they were at half-mast. Is that why they're at half-mast?
Yeah, for this dictator in a bathroom, for King Abdullah.
You're joking, right?
No, and that's why...
Wait a minute, U.S. flags are at half-mast for him still? How about we just permanently take him down because he died? Just worship him.
Well, I mean, the worst thing is that Tony Blair used to put his zipper down at half-mast for King Abdullah. You know, and this is the problem that we do have. You know, I mean, so what's happening is that when we say the Saudis, it's really the whole combine of this elite, because it means they're the Saudi consigliere, James Baker, who was our Secretary of State. Well, he was as much Saudi's Secretary of State as our Secretary of State. The same crew. And again, it's Democrats and Republicans. There's a bipartisan love affair. And when I go to England, you see the Tories and you see Tony Blair. In fact, there was the House of Saud, by the way, don't just take their easy squeezy through the oil. There was over $200 million paid to the House of Saud in a bribe by BAE, the British aerospace company. $200 million bribe. And when the prosecutors in Britain wanted to start arresting members of the House of Saud, the government stepped in and said, no, you can't do that. This is a national security matter. Bribery becomes a national security matter. This is so over. What
happens when it's so institutionalized that these mega billionaires can steal Greek islands because Greece bailed out that banker's debt? I mean, how far does this go? And then that leads us into the next big subject and why I wanted to have you here. George Soros, you name it, involved in Ukraine, and then you've got Soros that came out, 33 million trying to stir up street demonstrations with the black youth being killed. And I'm not saying that's a good thing they're being killed, but clearly if he's involved in something, it's for a larger reason. What do you see happening there? Tie it into the IMF shock doctrine, the 100-point-plus plan, where they talk about the IMF riot.
Okay, that's a lot, Alex. Let's start with the riot, okay? Joe, let's talk about insiders. This started when I was interviewing, so I'm an economist by training. Actually, I was a student of Milton Friedman, a very, the ultimate right-wing Nobel Prize-winning economist, Mr. Free Market. But I started smelling a rat listening to my dear professor, but I got to know a lot of the insiders. And one of them was Joe Stiglitz, who was Joseph Stiglitz, who's just, by the way, a couple of years ago won the Nobel Prize himself in economics.
He's won it twice.
Yeah, and this guy, so the Nobel Prize winner in economics, Joe Stiglitz, I had a discussion with him just before he got the prize in Britain. We were both actually teaching some economics courses. And on television and on tape, I interviewed him, and I showed him the inside documents. Because I get, I'm an old-fashioned investigative reporter, for those who know Greg Palast, the old gumshoe, like you say, Columbo style. And I got these inside documents from the IMF and the World Bank, and I said, Dr. Stiglitz, it looks to me, from reading these documents, these inside documents from the IMF and the World Bank, that they're actually planning riots, which would give them the excuse to then seize control of an economy.
Stay there. We're going to come back with these documents straight ahead with Greg Palast, investigative journalist, economist, to understand why they're trying to stir up global crises right now and what that means is coming next. This is Key Intel. Straight ahead, I'm Alex Jones, Infowars.com.
We're on the march.